Just like that, the regular season is over. Almost. But where do you even look first when trying to sum up the action of the past weekend? The task of a high-pressure concurrent fixture was met with aplomb by both the Phoenix and the Mariners as the premiership race goes down to the final kick of a ball. Western Sydney pull off one of the comebacks of the season against Victory to keep their hopes alive, but are dashed the next day by City. Then a couple of high-scoring games as well to keep the excitement flowing. And after one of us picked Adelaide United to come second in our Christmas predictions, does Carl Veart have a picture of Christian Montegan up in the dressing room just to remind the players of what people thought about them? They sure proved him wrong on this episode of the A-Leagues of Our Own podcast, presented by the Inner Sanctum. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me today is Christian Montegan himself. What do you think, Fred, of your mug up in the Adelaide dressing room?
Yeah, look, I don't think I have that popularity as of yet to, describe to a dressing room and to provide that motivation as of yet.
Well, just as a little bit of context for those who missed it, this is Phoenix coach Giancarlo Italiano in midweek.
There's a picture of a certain person on YouTube that tipped us to be last. It's up on the change room, and it stays up there, and it's a constant reminder of what people think of us. It's just a little reminder every day of how people quickly forget how good our players are. And the driving force is actually built by the group themselves. They've got, internally they've got a collective mindset that they want to prove a lot of people wrong. They want to, prove all the people that, tipped us to be last and show them that, what we're made of.
Now, we won't mention his name because he's copped enough slack over the last couple of days. One of the most committed content creators for the A-League as well. But Jacob Stevens, hello to you. He wasn't the only one either, but he copped the brunt of it, didn't he?
Yeah, hey Christian, hey Lockie. Yeah, you're right. He's copped the brunt of it, but there was certainly a fair few people around who weren't predicting the Phoenix to have much of a season this time around. I mean, they scraped into finals last year, and they've been doing that occasionally where they sort of scrape in and then go out in the elimination final. And with a couple of losses in the off-season and stuff as well, in terms of players leaving, I think a few people were like, yeah, they're probably not going to see much improvement. But Chiefy's completely turned that team around. And yeah, I mean, if that sort of stuff works and gets your team going and gets that motivation there, then, I mean, all power to them. But yeah, it does suck for anybody who did think that they were going to have a poor season, because now you're looking a bit stupid.
Yes, they certainly are. And I'm sure we are included in that conversation.
Yeah.
You kind of cheat the system a little bit, Christian, by doing our predictions at Christmas and not at the start of the year.
Yeah, that would be, it'd be sticky, because I definitely would probably have Wellington. If I had to be honest, maybe 7th or 8th, because Tally did a great job last season, with the side. So I would have thought, maybe with the squad they do have now, maybe it would have seen just a slight drop off. But the work that Italiano has done this season has just been tremendous, and real hats off to him.
All right. Well, we will get to Wellington, but as the regular season concludes, it extinguishes the championship hopes of half of the competition. Some knew their fate a long time ago, whilst the Western Sydney Wanderers were denied their chance at glory by mere centimetres almost 24 hours after their final game of the season. That game was Western Sydney Wanderers 4, Melbourne Victory 3. They did all they could do, Jacob, to jump into the 6, but City responded the next day with a 1-0 win over Western United, which featured an equaliser from Wallerty in the 74th minute that would have sent the Wanderers through, flagged offside only by the barest of margins. That really is how close it was.
Yeah, and this is what you get when it's been tight all season long for spots up and down the table, is it comes down to the last round. And I mean, we'll touch on the title battle as well a little bit later, I'm sure. But, this is another sort of residual one that maybe was perhaps overlooked because the title was on the line, is that, it's a battle between Western Sydney and City for who's going to finish up in that 6th spot. And yet neither of them were playing each other. So it was a case of, you can only do what you can do. Western Sydney, like you said, Lockie, they did what they could do, and they got that win over Victory. And I think the one thing that really stuck with me from that game was just the quality of finishing on display from both sides was absolutely insane. Goal, of course, got a lot of attention on social media. Clever little finish with the sort of Ozil bounce up and over the keeper. But Lockie Brooke had a fantastic strike as well. to open the scoring for the Wanderers. It was a very, very back and forth game, but the Wanderers just showed that sort of mental toughness and fortitude that I think maybe has been lacking a little bit recently for them. They've sort of fallen asleep a touch in games, and that's why they're missing out on finals ultimately, is they've had a little bit of a poor run of form. And this shows that they are capable of some very good results, but they just weren't consistent enough this season. City, meanwhile, as you touched on, I mean, that equaliser, had it of not been overruled, that's the sort of crazy thing that you get, like I said, when you've got a tight table all season long. But no, for City, they're counting their lucky stars that it didn't count, and that they're the ones that slide into the six. I'm slightly happy because it means that my prediction wasn't a complete failure, so that's always a plus as well. But no, two very good games, and I love when there's that sort of residual stuff in there where it's you're relying on results from other games to see what happens. It just makes things a little bit more exciting.
So it turns out that was the last game for Western Sydney. Christian, Jacob touched on the point that they had a team that was willing to fight, and that's what Marco Rudan said that he put out before the game. A younger team, a couple of the more experienced players were left out. Young players that were hopefully going to fight, and you see them go down 2-0 so early in the game, and you think, oh, okay, well that's the wrong end of making a decision like this. But to their credit, they did manage to turn it around, and coming down. No, sorry. What's forgotten about this Wanderers team is that earlier in the year, they did actually have a few really nice comebacks. And to get points in those. So they've always had that belief that they could do it in these moments, and they proved again.
Yeah, you're right. But I think in the end, ultimately, we've harped on about it all season, just these slow starts time and time again this season, which just really cost them, because there's been times where, for this instance, in this game, 2-0 down after 15 minutes away from home, I know they ended up winning the game, but you just can't afford to keep doing that, consistently throughout the season. You expect to, have a good run and a good season. It's funny how Rudan said that, he wanted to fight. He picked the side that, was going to, commit. But it was just a game too late, wasn't it? Because they needed that same energy and intensity against Melbourne City, which had they won that game at home, then obviously they would have been the ones, playing finals at the expense of City. So it's just those key moments, really. And just unfortunately for them, City got over the line, which we'll touch on a bit later. But I think the writing was always on the wall for a while that City would make the six ahead of the Wanderers, because, even though it was obviously very tight toward the end, given the discrepancy in form and some of the off-field issues that have, plagued the Wanderers, I mean, it's not that City had been lights out, and obviously they had their own issues, but, let's not forget the turmoil they experienced at the start of the season with dismissal of Rado Vidicic. So you look at the Wanderers, and it's a real, I guess, disappointment, underachievement that Rudan has been there now for, I think, 2 full seasons and hasn't really got anything to show for it other than, a couple of stigmas. So, there's a lot of soul searching to do at that club in the off season.
Yeah, so this marks the 6th out of the last 7 seasons that the Wanderers have missed the finals. And I guess, upon reflection, and this was always going to be the case, it was that game last week, Wanderers against City, that was always going to be the big deciding factor. But for Melbourne, Jacob, slightly encouraging that I guess Jamie McLaren gets what I'm going to call an important goal. Go back and look at his record, take out games where City have scored 7 goals or more, and McLaren hasn't scored since 3rd of December last year. There's 3 of those games where he's just part of the pylon. So we've talked about him plenty, but if they're going to go deep in finals, it looks like he has the preferred starting spots when it gets down to crunch time. So if they are going to go deep, it's going to, largely be off his boot.
Yeah, this has just been very uncharacteristic of McLaren this season, the way that he's been just almost unable to find the back of the net. And yes, okay, he's not played as many games as he normally does, and we've speculated as to potentially the reasons why that might be, but it's still the fact remains that in the games he has played, he hasn't been as effective as you'd normally expect him to be. And I do think that heading into finals, you need him in the team, but it's a case of it, because he's got that experience, right? He's got that experience playing finals football. That's what he can bring to the team. But if he's not firing, if he's not scoring goals, is it worth having him in there? So I think it'll be, Vidmar will be a little bit relieved maybe that he's he's got that goal now in the last game of the season. Hopefully gives him that little pep in his step to go and do whatever he can in finals to try and help out this struggling City side, which, you know, you look at some of the individual quality in terms of the players that they have, and you know, it's a pretty decent team, and they've just been extremely, again, it's inconsistency. They've underperformed. Jamie McLaren's not been fantastic. Their backline with, you know, who has some great players. You know, Curtis Good hasn't had his best season either. It feels like a moment for City this season where maybe they need to reevaluate where they're at. They've been towards the pointy end of the league for however many years now, and maybe they're sort of starting to come back down again, and they might need to think about sort of restructuring. And Christian mentioned soul searching for the Wanderers, but I think City might be in a similar sort of position in this off season in terms of looking at what they've got and where they want to be, and where they sort of expect to be, because they're pretty far off from it now. But yeah, McLaren scoring a goal just the week before finals is that's a huge boost for him and a huge boost for City, because if he's got his scoring boots on, we know how much of a problem he can be for literally any team in the league. So I guess it's just a case of wait and see, but it's certainly not a bad sign for City fans that he has finally found the back of the net in a game that matters, you know.
Yeah. Well, of course, we're in an odd scenario now where we're still a few days from deciding the final position of the ladder, but we do know what our elimination finals will be. Sydney FC will host Macarthur at 7:45 on Saturday night, and that will be followed by a Melbourne Derby elimination final on 5 p.m. on Sunday afternoon. Now, this was originally scheduled for 3 p.m., but moved to 5 earlier on Monday, largely due to fan complaints. This weekend is Orthodox Easter. I was talking to Ross, one of our other contributors today, who celebrates Orthodox Easter. He tells me that part of that tradition is a big family lunch on Sunday afternoon, which would have put many supporters in a tricky place. So that game has been moved, hopefully to allow more people in the stands. And Christian, we're going to do a more detailed kind of predictions on the final series for our Friday episode, but what are your first reactions to those matchups? It looks, city and city for both of them. It's going to be great.
Yeah, definitely. I think you can't really complain about the scheduling as well. I mean, Saturday night, Sydney audience, hopefully there'll be, a big number there in terms of TV audience, and obviously the crowd should be definitely a big one there. And then for the Melbourne Derby as well, I mean, yeah, that's going to be massive because you've got two teams there which you sort of really don't know what you're going to get from them. And, Jacob again touched on, the soul searching for City. Like, even Victory, defensively, they're just so vulnerable at the moment. So you don't really know what's going to happen in this game. We've seen a few of those derbies this season where there's been nil or a couple of goals in it. It's been very tight. So, yeah, it's going to be, really fascinating to see the matchups, the tactics, the nervous player factor in both of the games. So, yeah, it's going to be, fascinating to see.
And on Victory in their game against Western Sydney, Jacob, they came out of the blocks really well, as we said. Daniel Arzani scored 2 goals. As soon as he did, that meme from Happy Gilmore went through my head. Happy Daniel Arzani learns how to shoot. I know one was a deflection, but that is literally what Victory fans have been waiting for all season. He's been so dangerous. We know how good his feet are, and he's been creating so many chances, but it's often been the shots inside or just slightly outside of the box. The finishing the goals off himself has been the issue. And if I'm going to put it out there, I think if he can score as well as create as he has done so far this year, he is at least one of the top 5 players in the league. So exciting to watch. We see it on numerous occasions every week where he can be doubled up down on the wing, 1 against 2, and he'll slow the ball down and skid past 2 of them. Like he's just got that crazy X factor about him. If he can score goals, he's such a dangerous player.
I think the big problem for him in the early part of the season was that Victory and Popovic really struggled to find a way to properly incorporate him and use the talents that he does have, those ability to create those one-on-ones or those 1v2s where he can just drive at the defender and cause problems for them. And we've seen him sort of be unlocked in that role a little bit more over the last month or so. In terms of just, we've spoken about it on the podcast before with the rotations in the midfield from Victory that sort of just opens up that space for him to move into, and it gives him a little bit more freedom on the ball, and that's where he's really come alive. But like you said, now that he's starting to finish the ball as well, that's going to be a real big problem for for City coming in this upcoming game, and anybody else that Victory might end up facing in the finals, because he's constantly finding himself in good positions. And like you said, Lockie, it was just that end product that was missing. And was it his first goal was actually a really good finish as well. Nice hard ball across the box, and I mean, it sort of looks like a tap in, and you'd expect it to be, but it does take a decent amount of technique to be able to hit the ball as hard as he did, with as much precision as he did, up into that top corner as well. So, it's promising signs for him, and he's a talented player. We all know that. And, maybe his career hasn't panned out the way that he would have wanted, the way that I think many pundits would have expected it to. But, he's shown that he still has that fight in him, and he still has that talent, and he does want to win games, and he does want to be that player that we all thought that he would be, a couple of years ago. And yeah, he's coming alive again now. And it's exciting to see, as an Adelaide fan, obviously, I'd never like to see Victory players doing well, but he is a really quality player. And, you love having those sorts of players in the league, because they just make games so much more entertaining. And, you look at the impact that the likes of, Nestoria and Kunda have had in terms of just people coming to just watch because the play is exciting to watch, And I think that going forwards, if Victory can continue to sort of nurture him a little bit, and give him these opportunities to have that freedom on the ball, create chances for others, but create chances for himself and finish those chances as well, then we could have another sort of that face of the league almost going forwards into the next couple of seasons, I reckon.
And Christian, a couple of really horrible defensive moments for Victory, perhaps. There were no stakes on the line in this game for Melbourne. They were pinned into third place regardless of what any of the results would be. Is that what you put it down to? Because this has been a pretty defensively resilient side throughout most of the year, regardless of their inability to score goals.
I wouldn't say resilient as such, because there have always been patches in games where they have looked a bit suspect at times defensively. We've seen Miranda make a few mistakes this season, for example. And yeah, just the whole back four unit in general, no matter, which holes Popovich decides to plug in, it just seems like they're always suspect of vulnerability. And that's just what really scares me about this team, because, just the first two goals they conceded in this game, it was either the first one where they were just jockeying back, no communication, they didn't know when to commit forward and press. And then the second one, they just let Milanovic just stroll into the 6-yard box and, just easy tap in. So when you have that lack of communication there, and it's the last game of the season. So if that's not already there, then you wonder what's going to happen in finals when they come up against potentially, a Mariners or a Phoenix who are already well drilled. They know what to do when they don't have the ball. So for the Victory, that's my only real concern, because like you guys mentioned, going forward with the likes of Ozani, they've got the talent there. It's just all together as a unit and a collective, it's just a bit questionable.
Interesting, because I actually kind of slightly disagree there, in terms of I don't think that the defense is necessarily the biggest worry heading into this next game for the Victory and heading into finals. The Victory have the third best defensive record in the league. They've got a back four that's been, for the most part this season, pretty well set. And, you're going to start the majority of them if they're available. Obviously, Jason Yerrier wasn't in this last game, which I think actually left a pretty big hole at the back and could have been the source of some of those problems. I think we're still awaiting on what's going to happen with him, right, Lockie?
So Guerrier has referred that suspension to the Independent Disciplinary and Ethics Committee. He was given 2 games, of course, where the minimum for the offence he committed was 1 game. So he was always going to serve this suspension this week, but we'll find out on Tuesday, I believe, if that's downgraded or not.
Yeah, so if he's back, then I think that that's going to be huge, because he has been very, very good this season. Obviously made it into our All-Stars team as well. But yeah, I think that just the solidity and the certainty of having almost the same 4 players at the back week in, week out has served Victory quite well. So I don't think that is actually the biggest problem for Victory heading into finals. I think the biggest problem could be if the likes of Arzani do sort of revert to that early season form, or that sort of that period where there were a lot of draws and things where just weren't able to finish chances, putting a lot of good balls in the box, but nobody was there, sort of thing. I think that could be actually the bigger issue for Victory. But I mean, I don't know. That's just me looking from the outside in, I suppose. So
yeah, I think the personnel on the back four is an important point. They've lost Darwin Traore to injuries at times. Miranda has been suspended twice, where there's been holes, and Connor Chapman comes in for Gary in this game, and I think I agree causes a few holes as well. But let's move on. It was all set up to be one of the most dramatic finishes to an A-League regular season that we'd ever seen. The two premiership hopefuls kicking off at the same time, fighting it out minute by minute to claim the plate. It didn't quite work out the way we wanted it to, but the excitement level was still as high as we'd seen it in the final week for quite some time. In the end, the Phoenix and Mariners both came away with wins that will push the deciding 90 to Central Coast's matchup with Adelaide on Wednesday night. This is kind of one of the most high-profile experiments we've had with concurrent games. Christian, the post moment did take a little bit of the sting out of it because it wasn't quite that all high-stakes encounter that we wanted it to be. But we did have a couple of nice moments. The Mariners, I think it was the 2-1 goal in the 82nd minute, just as the Wellington Yellow Fever were doing their shirts off, waving them around in the air. They obviously got the news that they were no longer top of the league, and I think that took a bit of the sting out of it. So a couple of fun moments, but hopefully we can do it more in the years to come with a little more in the line.
Yeah, I think this is what fans have been really crying out for, because, some of us who watch the European leagues and you see the final day of the season, games played simultaneously, and you get that real excitement about it. You don't know what's happening in each game. Obviously, the players are focused on what they're doing on the field, but they don't know the result. The fans are checking on their phones to see the results of the other games. So it just adds that extra bit of spice, extra bit of, excitement and joy. So, we definitely saw that on Saturday, despite what you said, Lockie. Obviously, there's still a game to go to sort of decide the Premier's plate. So I lost a bit of the juice there. But nonetheless, there were still great storylines coming out of both. Wellington, again, obviously proving, strong at home. They're going to be really, really tough to beat. I know we've said it time and time again, but just been phenomenal this season. And then the F3 derby, I thought if there was a chance for the Mariners to drop points, I said it all week, but to their credit, they just always seem to find a way, against the Jets side, who I think they were undefeated in the past 4 games. So had a bit of a spring in their step, but in the end, the Mariners, finding a way yet again.
Jacob, what did you make of the concurrent games experiment? We watched it on the live stream together. It was a bit of fun. You had one commentary, I had the other. We were trying to keep up with both of them. Surely it has to come back, right?
I think so, especially if it's going to be another case of there's a few teams fighting things out on that last day. Even if it's not necessarily for the title, but for final spots or whatever.
Right.
Like we mentioned before, I don't think as early as next year, Christian.
Maybe the Australia Cup.
Yeah. But no, I do think that it just adds a little bit more to the experience. And you've got the case of, I think that a lot of the time you're going to have fans who aren't going to just tune into other games if their team's not playing. But if there's, simultaneous games on, you get that sort of goal rush type thing going, and it sort of increases that engagement and the number of people you get watching and involved. And it just makes things a little bit more fun for everybody. And it was definitely a test of our abilities to sync up our streams and stuff. But no, it was good fun. I really enjoyed it. And I hope to see it back again.
Just to add in something as well that I think would be pretty cool for the future. I think, just say, for example, if a goal was scored in Wellington and you're watching the Central Coast game, if they just panned over, just, on the side of the screen where they might show the replay of the goal, for example, I think that would be pretty cool to add in. But I don't know, just a suggestion for Paramount. I don't know if they want to take that advice, but I think that'd be pretty awesome.
I can't remember if they still do this or when they decided not to, but definitely some of the old FFA Cup days, if there were multiple ties on at the same time, you'd have that kind of goal rush where they'd, ring the alarm and you'd switch the feeds over and have a look. That would be so much fun. I think that'd be great. And the more significant the final day of the season gets, potentially with final spots, a top 4 Asia Premiership, maybe even relegation, considering how much impact would be condensed into maybe 14 or 16 teams, I think that'd be so much fun. But in terms of the game themselves, we'll go to Wellington first. They won 3-0 over Macarthur, over 15,000 fans, which was great to see. They did it reasonably comfortable in the end, Jacob. They all came on the pitch afterwards, had a big celebration, all the fans getting on there. I even saw one clip of Alex Paulson in the purple goalkeeper kit. Some guy gave him like the helmet of the purple Teletubby, and it was just, but yeah, it only ever looked like one team was going to win this game, really.
Yeah, it was almost sort of you were mentioning it on the live stream, Lucky. You never felt like they were going to lose, even in the lead up to the game. It was a case of they just don't lose at home, especially not in a game this important. And they did. They did make it look relatively easy. In that first half, MacArthur just didn't even have a sniff. Wellington were pressing really well, completely just smothered the MacArthur midfield and creating a lot of turnovers and things. And I think the one issue that Wellington did have was, playing out from the back. They were a little bit sloppy and turned the ball over every now and again, but they really tightened up in the second half and put the game to bed. And MacArthur did come back into it towards the end, to their credit, and they did fight for it. I think Uli Davila and Valère Germain had a couple of chances each, which, maybe on another day would have found the back of the net, but it was, it just seemed almost like a certainty that Wellington were going to win that game from the get-go. They played really, really well. They played the sort of football that we've come to expect from them as well. Nice direct football up the wing, getting the ball in behind. That's where they're super dangerous. And, they'd beaten MacArthur already this season, playing exactly that same way. And they went out, did it again, and won 3-0. And they showed everybody, what they're about. And to be honest, there are teams that can probably take a lesson from how Wellington were able to hold on to a 3-0 lead. Maybe not A-League teams, lucky, but yeah.
3-0.
But yeah, no, it was just a fantastic occasion, and it is a bit of a shame that they didn't win the league, and that it was.
Sorry, you're referencing the other team. I got lost there.
Yeah,
Derby this morning.
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah, but no, it was a bit of a shame for the fans that they didn't win the league on the day, but I mean they did everything they could, and like we mentioned with the Wanderers earlier, that's all that could be asked of them. And they went out and they did that in front of a huge crowd, and like you mentioned, there were some great moments after the game as well. I remember during the live stream, all I saw was it just. All of a sudden, the camera panned to a couple of people. It was super zoomed in, just running on the field. And I thought that people it was just an impromptu pitch invasion, but it was an actual organized thing. And when the camera panned out, we could see that. But for a moment there, I thought they'd gone completely bonkers. But no, it was a great result for Wellington. I think just really sort of summed up their season quite nicely. And that's the sort of football we've come to expect from them, how they can play. And, heading into the finals, they've got a lot going for them, and it's again. I think everybody's going to probably think it's going to be one of Wellington or Central Coast that's going to take it all, and deservedly so, because they've been the two best teams so far this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just this whole build-up, the storyline behind Wellington, it was only going to end one way, and you mentioned that away leg to MacArthur earlier in the year. I know for me, and we talked about this on the podcast, that was the game where I really felt like they stepped up in how they played. They weren't just a sit-back counter-attacking team. They were someone who, could when they wanted to, and they've done it sparingly because we know how Italiano likes to think in terms of matchups against teams, but they have the ability to turn it on and dominate teams when they want to. And, for MacArthur, they needed at least a point for a home final, but on the storyline of the last 3 weeks of a whole, that wasn't the goal. It was really just to confirm their finals place, period. They lost to Villa for 2 games. They managed to win them both in quite remarkable circumstances. So that's job done for MacArthur. They're playing finals. And Christian, I don't really know where to go with them. I feel like they're the team I believe in least heading into the finals next week. But they have the star quality. Germain and Davila, if they get, on one of these runs, just one game, they can take control of games of football.
Yeah, you're right. But even with Davila coming back in this game, like Jacob mentioned, there was never really a sense that MacArthur were really in the game. I'm not too sure if, they sort of took their foot off the pedal and, just sort of had one eye on finals football next week. But I mean, I think it comes down to adaptability as well, because we've seen, the Phoenix, for example, and Italiano, it's about those matchups and, the tactical battles and, switching, making those tactical tweaks. Whereas I feel as though MacArthur struggle a bit, where it's certain just to pick their battles. I think Stadowski struggles on occasion to get the best out of his players when when he needs them the most in terms of a tactical sense. You know, the midfield battle against the Phoenix, for example, they just sort of got outdone, outran, outfought. There were just no real ideas in there. So it's just stuff like that, because they do have the talent, obviously. You know, they're in finals for a reason, but when it comes to playing these top games and, you know, it comes to tactically, I just don't trust MacArthur, really, to be honest. So, yeah, I think it's just going to have to come down to the final third and that productivity from Davila and Jermaine to really step up, because if it's not for that, then you struggle to see how they're really going to progress past Sydney, who are, you know, there's the Sydney side really flying at the moment. So, yeah, it could be a tough finals defeat on Saturday, but yeah, we'll wait and see.
Yeah, and then to the F3 derby, Central Coast did get it done 2-1 against the Newcastle Jets, but it certainly was not plain sailing, Jacob. They were pegs back to 1-1. Sorry, they won 3-1, didn't they?
Yes.
Great one.
I believe I just get scores wrong. Well, to head over to the F3 derby, Central Coast did get the job done 3-1 against the Newcastle Jets. But Jacob, it was anything but plain sailing. They were locked at 1 apiece for a long time, and they had to wait until the final 10 minutes, it was, I think, to get the breakthrough. But they did get it in the end. A huge travelling support as well made their way to McDonald Jones Stadium. And they're all set up now, 1 game to go. The power is in their hands, just a point needed against Adelaide for the premiership.
Yeah, it was definitely panic stations there for Mariners for a little bit with that. Jets just came out of the half. 30 seconds later, the ball's in the back of the net and Stamatolopoulos is celebrating, and everyone was sort of a bit, well, what's just happened here? I think the Mariners maybe just had switched off a little bit or weren't completely back in the game straight from kickoff, and the Jets capitalised on that, because it was really one of their only chances in that second half. They had a couple in the first half. Stammer found his way in behind a couple of times, but nothing really too threatening. And the Mariners, I think, yeah, it was definitely, like I said, panic stations for them a bit, because they were also, struggling to create decent chances for themselves as well. And like you mentioned, Lockie, it did come down to those last 10 minutes or so when the game finally started to open up. I think probably a few tired legs out there for the Jets. And it reminded me a little bit of that second leg of the AFC Cup game that the Mariners had just had, in terms of, they've not generated a huge number of fantastic chances throughout the game. And as the game sort of slows down a little bit towards the end and they can bring on some subs and make those changes, get fresh legs out there, that's when they're looking really dangerous. And we know from everything we've seen from the Mariners this year that they're going to fight late into games, and they're not going to just give up. And it's, again, the case here. The extra incentive, of course, of, the title on the line. There's an F3 derby anyway as well. So it was sort of a double thing for him there, where you don't want to, have that draw in a derby game, but also, that's your title chances significantly hampered if you drop points there. So, great fight back from them. And it was a really entertaining game of football. And like you mentioned earlier, Lockie, when that goal goes in and, the Wellington fans have their shirts off over in New Zealand, and the broadcast sort of mentions that, over in Newcastle, goals gone in for the Mariners, and you can just sort of, it's almost like somebody turned the volume down. It just suddenly got a little bit quieter over there, and that's what you've got to love about these, concurrent games. It's fantastic stuff, and again, another fantastically entertaining game. And Mariners, they had to work for it, but to their credit, they did. They got those goals, and now, like you mentioned, they just need the point against Adelaide, which you'd say is pretty much a guaranteed result for them, because the way that Adelaide have played recently doesn't inspire much confidence. But you never know in football.
You never know, and the games are stacking up. They've had these, midweek games in the AFC Cup. It doesn't let up from here. They go to they're playing Adelaide in Gosford, but then have to go to Oman, which is where the final of the AFC Cup will be played on Sunday. So they don't get the benefit of that week off for finishing inside the top 2. So the games just keep coming, although perhaps a 6 or 7 day break to the next week might feel like a longer break than usual because of the congestion they've had. Again, we don't know who's going to win the premiership, but they will finish top 2, so we can confirm some of the fixtures. The second leg of the semi-finals, they both have chosen to play at home. They'll both be on Saturday, the 18th of May. Wellington hosting at 4:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Time, and then in Gosford for the Mariners at 7:45. So that Wellington game, I believe, is as late as they can go, whilst accounting for extra time and penalties. But in terms of the first legs, of course, we'll have to wait to know who's playing. But Christian, in terms of the Newcastle Jets in this F3 derby, obviously finishing the season off on a loss is not what they want, but there was good news in the pre-game show. Ben Homer reporting for Channel 10, suggesting that a deal had been done, and A-Leagues of our own also understands that the paperwork for the sale of the Newcastle Jets is off with lawyers for sign-off as well. So this 3-year-long struggle, hopefully, we think, and yes, we've heard that before, but it may be finally over.
Yeah, I saw the news circulate on social media just before kickoff, what you were mentioning, Lachlan. Just my first instant reaction was just a sense of relief that, finally, the Jets, have a sense of, I guess, sense of reality, whereas, they've got an ownership where, finally they can lay back on it, say, okay, we're safe now. We can finally feel a bit more comfortable and look ahead to the future, because, recently there's just been a bit of unhealthy talk about, whether the Jets are going to survive. Do they have a place in the league? Which, for the fans as well, from their perspective, it must be pretty scary to think of it that way. Supporting the club, which has been there since pretty much day one, and, to think potentially they might not be in existence is pretty terrifying thought. So to get that out of the way, it's great now for the off season. They can regroup, maybe, I guess plan a long-term future, I guess, because, in the past it's been, I think, a case of, looking at a bit of the short term and not having a long-term goal. So I think from that point of view, that's going to be really important for the Jets, because they have had moments in the league, that grand final appearance a few years ago where they sort of set the league on fire. They had a project then, they were sort of developing a bit of youth, had Merrick at the helm, a few football minds at the top. So to see, hopefully, to get them back at the top will be great to see. But again, it's all about that planning, and hopefully this ownership now coming through, they do have those right ideas, and it's not just about the financial side of it and the money, trying to make a profit. It's about, helping stabilize this club and pushing it forward, because that's what the fans deserve at the end of the day.
Yeah, just a quick aside on that grand final you mentioned. Some of you may have seen David Squires' comic or cartoon in The Guardian this week on Lee Proxim's retirement. And one of the panels in that was depicting that grand final at Newcastle with Kevin Muscat giving one hell of a slide tackle to the cameras or the cables that connected the VAR system together, which I thought was quite humorous, but that was good. Well, the other game this weekend that had finals implications was Perth Glory capitulation. Sydney FC won at 7-1. It does mean that they lock up a home final, but the story of this game was really not with them. I believe Andy Harper described it as a Swiss cheese approach to defending, one of the analogies that he used. Perth were completely all over the place in this game. Christian, I'll come back to you. It just feels like no spirit whatsoever the last month or so. The players seem to have just given up. It's not great viewing if you're a Perth Glory fan. They've only just fallen short of the all-time goals conceded record in the A-League men's. It's not a place you want to be, and I think you can expect a pretty hefty clear out over the break.
Yeah, I touched on it after the 8-1 defeat to City. It was 8-1 or 8-0? Did they score one against City? I've forgotten.
God.
Whether it's 8-0, that's the point. They conceded 8 goals, and I was saying, to not have that fight and desire just to play for the shirt, I mean, that's all the fans want. And those travelling supporters, I just felt so sorry for them. And then to see him ship 7 in this game, it was just the same old story. I mean, I know the season's over, but surely Stadge is, getting his group around the locker room and training pitch and saying, boys, we know the season's over, obviously, but there's a chance for a bit of pride on the line. Show that you're worthy of the shirt. Show that you're worthy to play for the club next season, because your futures are on the line. And you just got a sense of, there was just nothing of that at all. And it was just really disappointing to see, because it was just more like a training session for Sydney, really. Just so disappointing. Taggart has been, one of the limelights of this season. What has been a pretty dull, a dull 27 games of the season. You can call it that because, it's just been really dire straits, and you'd probably expect a bit of a clean out, including the manager. I questioned it last week as well with Stajic. I know it's not overly his fault. Obviously, a new ownership has come in with Ross Pelligra. So they're also at a club with a lot of planning to do in the off season. Think, what direction do we want to go into, heading into next season? So whether that's Stajic, whether that's another manager, if someone else is available, there's been talk of a couple of A-League managers are potentially appointed. Maybe Popovic is one of them, coming back to his old club. But at the same time, I think it's a bit hard on Stajic as well. Just coming into the club, we know it's a bit of a shambles off field. I think just a clean out with the players is going to be first and foremost a real priority if they want to really challenge at least for a top 6 spot either next season or in the years to come.
Yeah, so there have been reports that Christian has alluded to about Alen Stajic being on the outer at Perth Glory. He and certain members of the club have since denied that. He has 2 years left on his contract. Jacob hasn't really had the ability to have a real crack at it. But of course, the onus is the big variable there. We know the commitment of spending that Ross Pelligra has made, that he will put into the club. You'd assume with those kind of funds hanging around that it probably actually would be viable for Perth to cut those 2 years off Stagic's contract if they really wanted to. I find it incredibly harsh if that were to be the case. And in the A-League era that we're in now, where you can't just go out and buy players, you have to deal with contracts and negotiating with players. It doesn't take just one window to build a squad. It often takes a couple. And I feel like getting rid of him now, when you don't even have the ideal player base behind you to do what you want to do, I feel like that would be really short-sighted.
Yeah, I think it's also a case of who, as a coach, is available that you're going to take that's going to be, a considerable improvement on Stajic. And Christian, you mentioned Popovic, and obviously there's been rumours about, he and Victory being a little bit apart in terms of contract negotiations there. But does he represent a big enough jump for it to be worth, like you mentioned, Lockie, having that almost sort of short-sightedness of cutting Stajic now and then bringing Popovic into a situation arguably worse than what Stajic has had, because we're expecting a few players to be leaving that because they're not good enough, and him then being forced into this position of having to sign players. It's it's a tough decision for them to have to make. If there's somebody out there that's available that they think is going to be the guy to lead the club into the the future and represent success for the Glory, then they're going to go ahead and do it. But it's a case of they've got to weigh it up whether it's worth it at this point in time, and if that person is even available. You don't want to be spending money to cut a contract here for Stajic and then potentially having to buy someone else out because they're not available yet, and then it not working out anyway. A lot to weigh up, and it would be harsh. I don't think, I think Stajic has been all right this season, and he got Perth on the turnaround for a little bit there. And I'll be the first to say sorry to Glory fans, because it was when we started to endorse them that they've had this downward spiral again, and they've missed out on finals as they were sort of looking towards it for a little bit, about 2/3 of the way into the season. I think he's shown that he's got the right sort of ideas to get this club back on an upwards trajectory. But like you mentioned, Lockie, it's a case of not having a squad there at the moment, and it is going to take time to build it because, A-League clubs don't have the sort of money, even with, Pelligra's intended investments, to go out and just buy players. Plus, it's a salary capped league anyway. So even if you do go and buy these magnificent players, are you actually going to be able to afford them? Or are you in breach of the rules? So, I will just add that wouldn't be the first time that Glory did that. But no, it would be very harsh for him to get the sack now. And from everything that he's said to the media, he is fully of the belief he'll be back next season. And we've not heard anything from the club, obviously, yet, but guess time will tell for that one. But yeah, no, I agree with you, Lockie. It would be quite harsh on Stajic for him to have to leave, and he was never given, the position really to to have success because of what's been going on at the club over the last 18 months.
Yeah, of course. Christian, you're right to point out Adam Taggart as well. He will win the Golden Boot, barring a remarkable 5 goals, I think, is needed from Hiroshi Ibasuki in midweek. Taggart got 20 on the season, closely followed by Bruno Fornarelli on 18 and Stamatolopoulos on 17. It's a nice reward for him for a great individual season. We know how much passion he has for the club and the city. He's made no secret of the fact that if possible, he would love to, spend the rest of his career at Perth if that was a realistic option. So just rewards for him for a good season. Of course, Sydney were the team that won this game as well. We mentioned that they lock up a home final, completely ruthless in this one, and never really gave them a sniff. But let's move on to the 7-goal thriller in Brisbane. It really didn't let up this week. Brisbane Roar 3, Adelaide United 4. A 4-goal scoreline for Adelaide in which Irankunda didn't score, Jacob.
Yeah, he didn't have much of an impact at all. He got an early yellow card, and that was basically him out of the game then, because his, obviously got a very physical play style, and he's always flirting with getting those yellows. And once he does get them, you don't want to run the risk of him being sent off and then, having to face a suspension for the final game. And I mean, there was been a bit of talk about a suspension for him anyway, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a bit. But yeah, no, he just did not have much of an impact at all. And it wasn't a case of him playing badly. It was a case of just him not being able to get into the game because of that early yellow card. And then obviously later on into the game, Panache Medana was brought on in place of Irankunda and had an immediate impact with 2 goal contributions, which is nice to see, because he's struggled this season. Started out at right back, did not do very well there. And I'm sure he would say the same thing, in that he just did not have the performances that he would have liked there, and has come back into the side now in a more advanced role on the wing and looks much more comfortable and is able to make those impacts in the attacking third that we've seen from him at NPL level here in Adelaide for a long time. So, that's promising signs. And Ibasuki again on the score sheet with a brace. He's been absolutely tremendous this season for Adelaide United, and the front four as a whole over the last month or so, the last 6-7 games, has been I think one of the best front fours in the league in terms of the way that they're all on the same wavelength and able to generate chances. And they're scoring 4 goals, regularly this season. But the issue has been at the back, and the fact that, it was a case of Adelaide have scored 4 goals in this game against Brisbane, and it almost at one point looked like they wouldn't get the 3 points. That's just an absolutely absurd thing to say. It's what's going. You mentioned the Swiss cheese defense. Well, this was a purely vibes-based defense, because it was like they weren't even out there sometimes. So, no, but I did touch on Ibasuki just before, and he's obviously somebody that there's a lot of talk around at the moment in terms of what's his future in the league and with the club. He's off contract, and the reports swirling around are that the club potentially might not re-sign him, and that the rumour is he'll be heading off to Brisbane next season, which would be an absolutely massive loss for Adelaide, because this is the first time since I think it was Sergio Van Dijk back in 2010 that they've had this many goals from a striker in a season, which that's more than a decade ago, and they finally get a striker who can do that, and they might not retain him, which that's a frightening prospect. But I guess we'll see. And like you said, he's not going to win the Golden Boot unless he scores a double hat trick. But he's still had a fantastic season anyway. It'll be interesting to see what happens, because there's going to be a number of players that the club will have to bring in the off season anyway. And I think the last thing they'd want to do surely is having to bring in a striker as well on top of all of that.
Yeah, I can't see the logic in letting him go, to be honest. I find it crazy that they perhaps are even considering it. But I guess we'll find out. Of course, the goals in this week, it's not been particular to one game, and it's led to a couple of league-wide records. 30 goals in one round is the highest ever in the A-League men's, and it's also taken the highest ever goals per game of any Australian men's top flight since records in 1977, with an average of 3.34 goals per game, and that will even hold as the record with a 0-0 in midweek. The question there is, Well, this is actually a good thing. Goals are fun, Christian. That's a really fun part of football. But part of that fun is that they are scarce. And, we've celebrated the A-League for having high goals per game. This round perhaps took it a little bit too far. These kind of outlying games where teams are seriously just getting hammered. They're not quite the kind of fun that we're looking for.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of obviously Perth, for example, where they've shipped in 7 and 8, like we've mentioned before. Like besides that, I've been saying before that the A-League's actually gotten much stronger, I think, defensively, and that has to do with a lot with the tactics side of the game, a lot of new coaching styles coming in, different philosophies, whereas I thought in previous years there were definitely a lot more goals. Obviously, we've broken the record here, so there's something in it. I mean, to put it down to something in particular, I mean, you just have to basically say that the defensive unit, probably from just say the top 2 or 3, downwards, besides the Mariners, Phoenix, and the Victory, you see all those teams, they're pretty suspect and vulnerable, at the back at times. So to see, so many goals. And again, there's a lot of attacking focus as well in this modern day and age. So, to see a lot of counterattacks going on, obviously that open spacing behind for teams to exploit. So you've got that aspect as well. So yeah, I think it's a matter of a few combinations, but I mean, nothing really specific for me to put your finger on it. I know Jacob's got a theory.
Yeah, well, it's not even an A-League problem because I believe this season in the Premier League as well, it's the most goals ever in a Premier League season. So it seems to be, like you mentioned, Christian, sort of a trend in modern football now that there's sort of this focus on attack. And it's one of those things where defences and goalkeepers can only do so much as attacks become better and better and better and, much more refined and more efficient. So, I don't think it's an exclusive trend for the A-League or for Australia. And I don't think it's anything necessarily to worry about. You do look at some of the, the names that are on the starting lineups for some of these teams in defence, and you think they probably wouldn't make a team in years prior. I think it just might be a case of the talent just wasn't out there this year, and that there's a big off season coming up with a lot of clubs needing a lot of players, and we could see an influx of potentially some foreign names and things like that to come in and maybe make a difference there. But no, I'm with you, Christian. I think it's just the trend in modern football, and it swings and roundabouts. One season it'll be like this where we'll see an increase in goals, and then perhaps the next season, as defenses start to catch up, it'll get a bit more scarce again.
You talk about the potential influx in foreign defenders, perhaps even older defenders. I know we've seen that a lot in the A-League in recent years. This year we've obviously had the trend towards youth. There are exceptions, of course. Like I'm looking at the Wellington Phoenix lineup. Most of their regulars, apart from 1 or 2 in defence, are 22 or younger. So, they've managed to put a pretty solid defence together with youthful players. But then you get to clubs like Adelaide, which, have this incredible proportion of minutes given to under 23 players. And you say, well, yeah, okay, you're giving them opportunity, but also Adelaide are at the point this season where they haven't had another choice. So there's definitely, contradictions there. But I think if we can just remove some of those really obscure scorelines like the 8-0s, like the 7-0s, it's nice 1 or 2 times a season, but you get more than that. And
well, that's the thing.
Tighter ships are good.
There's been so many of those this season as well. I mean, Perth have had a couple, Adelaide have had a few big losses, City have, Brisbane have had at least one. It's a bit strange because I don't think we've ever seen it, before in a season where there have been so many of those complete capitulations from teams where they don't even almost sort of show any fight whatsoever. And it's a bit strange. It does feel like every couple of rounds you get one that's a really big scoreline, and that sort of probably props up these stats a little bit as well.
I think another thing as well I was going to mention just quickly, I think playing out from the back's massive as well, because even this season, the A-League, I've seen so many mistakes just playing out from the back, just this constant, playing out from the back, passing around. Even West United, a couple of weeks ago, there was a couple where they just gave the ball away cheaply. Even the Wanderers on the week against Victory, the first goal for Mishash, just a silly ball just given away like that, just playing out from the midfield. So yeah, it's just stuff like that where mistakes creep in, and yeah, it's a modern day thing like we mentioned.
I think that definitely ties back to Ange Postecoglou as well. He's obviously like this heralded coach in Australian football, going overseas, doing what he's doing at Tottenham, and that's very much his play style, is to do what we do, play out from the back, and pretty much be unrelenting in that belief. Jacob mentioned there was a little bit of confusion around a potential suspension for Nestri Irankunda. He did pick up his 8th yellow card of the season, but one of them was a second yellow, which doesn't count towards these accumulation suspensions. So he is free to play. That was confirmed by the club on Wednesday night. And the other bit of news that this all ties into these last games is that the Australia Cup playoffs have been confirmed. The matchups, Brisbane Roar will play Perth and the Newcastle Jets will take on Western United at some point, at some place. We don't know. They went to Darwin last year. They have been home and away in the past. So I don't think we'll find that out for a long time. If you haven't made it this far in the show, we do appreciate you. You're likely one of our core listeners. You may have noticed we went about today's show a slightly different way. So if you do have any feedback for us, there is a comment section on Spotify and YouTube where we post these podcasts now. You got reviews on Apple Podcasts. We do promotion on Twitter as well. So wherever you get us, wherever you find us, we would love your feedback. What makes the show worth coming back to for you? What would you like to hear more of? Any suggestions as well? We are very keen to hear your thoughts. But guys, let's get into the predictions game to wrap off this episode. An absolutely appalling effort from everybody involved this week. We were talking pre-show. Usually I go into our rundown and I color code them based on if they were close, if they were completely wrong. I've had to invent 2 completely new categories this week because we were so bad. So we'll start with the flops, all right? So Paletti said Irankunda would score against the Roar. As we said, Adelaide had a 4-goal game where Irankunda didn't score, so they missed. Christian, you said MacArthur would get a draw against the Phoenix. Didn't even look likely. And Will, following up from last week where he said there wouldn't be a 0-0 draw, and there was. This week he said that there would be a 0-0 draw, and there wasn't. So I think it's quite funny because he's got them the wrong way around. So you 3 are out. Also out is Ross, who has received the grey highlight treatment, who said Melbourne Victory would draw again and drop down to 4th. It was never even mathematically possible for Melbourne Victory to drop down to 4th. So I think negative points are on the cards, to be honest, there. And then I've got a given purple to Chris, who is the ground announcer at the Newcastle Jets, suggesting that he might get his face on the broadcast, on the television broadcast for the F3 derby. I didn't see him. I was focusing on that game during our live stream, Jacob. I've heard no one in the group chat, including Chris, speak up and say they saw him. I think we gave him a miss.
I think so. I wasn't focusing on that game as much as you were, Lockie, but yeah, I didn't notice him either. And it's one of those things where I feel like if he was on there, somebody would have screen capped it and sent it in our group chat, because that seems to happen a lot. So yeah, no, I think I'm with you on scoring that as a miss for him.
He would have went back to but then himself. He would have recorded and say, okay, I'm on the screen. He would have said in the group chat. We lucked that he wasn't on, so we write him off.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Well, if the problem is if we do write him off, then we're screwed, okay? Because we haven't got any greens this week. We've got 2 oranges for close, and it's myself with the Jets to beat the Mariners, which obviously didn't happen. But I also said the title would go down to the final game against Adelaide, which it has. So I've got partial credit there. And Jacob said City to lose, which they didn't. They won, but hold on to 6th spot, which they did. So, Christian, I'm going to put it down to you. Which is the worst of those 2 evils?
Even then, like, you both don't deserve points because you've given 2 different scenarios. That is so cheating. Like, you're just giving yourself an avenue just to get yourself points where...
well, we got to give a 3-2-1.
All right, so the 3 I'm going to give to Jacob because, you know, there was a real possibility. Wanderers did their victory, so City had to win that game and hold on to that 6th spot. So you got to say Jacob's done well there. You've got to admit, at least he's got that spot on.
All right,
Lockie, I'm going to give you.
Who gets 1 though?
Yeah. I was automatic second.
Lockie, default. I was going to follow you on 2 points, and for 1 point.
Do we give the one to Lockie, and then we just get 3 each?
Look, I'm going to say, man, who do you give it to? Jesus. You probably just have to give it to Chris on the basis of him being at the game and there was a chance of him being on the team.
Benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
perhaps there was one clip that we missed, or the big screen was in the background, and he was doing the ground announcing.
Yeah.
So 3 votes Jacob, 2 votes Lockie, 1 vote Chris.
The fact that we're clutching the straws there just says everything about our predictions.
I know. Right, let me update.
We've all just, but those were all in just sort of in your style there, Christian, in terms of just missing completely. We're feeling a bit sorry for you, so.
I just get 1 green line this season, just as in my name.
That's on you. That's on you.
All right. Well, we have a further shake-up that 3 votes has put Jacob into a tie for first, and by virtue of a count back, actually, let me just count it back properly. 1, 2, 3. Yes, 4 rounds with 3 votes. Jacob, you're in the lead. You're setting the pace with just the final series to go.
Thank you, Christian.
Coletti is equal on 16. Coletti is equal on 16, but yes, that tiebreaker there. I'm 1 vote behind on 15, and then there is Daylight, 4 points to Chris in 4th. So it looks like it's a 3-horse race with, I think we're saying 4 rounds to go. We'll do the grand final, and we might have to get specific, but yes, 4 rounds to go.
My name Lockie, there was no need to go there, so happy.
Well, what do you want to tell me? What do you want me to say? You're still dead last? Like, is that really
No, exactly. I'm just happy that you didn't mention it. I'm just...
Okay, well, now you brought it up and I have mentioned it, so enjoyed that one as well. But that will do for this episode of the A Leagues of Our Own podcast. Christian Montegan, thank you.
Appreciate it, Lockie. Yes,
I'm sure, just as all the Adelaide United players do when they tap your little chin on the way out their tunnel down at IMAR Stadium. Jacob Stevens, thank you as well.
Thank you very much, Lockie.
All right, we'll be back tomorrow on Wednesday for our review of the second leg of the A-League Women's semi-finals, with the grand final, of course, coming up this weekend as well. But thank you all for listening. Goodbye.